All right, guys, and welcome to the show. And on today's episode, we have Craig Stanland, who is a best-selling author, a TEDx speaker, and a reinvention architect. But it's the why Craig is these things that we're going to get into today, because he's got a great story to tell and he's on a great mission. So I'll let you do that part of it as we get into this, Craig. So welcome. Thanks for joining us today. And tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Dale, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited for this because I know we spoke before this, and I know this is going to be an awesome conversation. So thank you for the intro. And people are probably wondering what the heck a reinvention architect is. And also, like you said, how I got there. But basically, I help people. I specialize in helping my clients who have climbed their professional mountain only to find themselves at the summit with a success-sized hole in the middle of their chest. They are, trapped by the golden handcuffs. They're living life on autopilot. And all they really want is to hit the reset button and really create something of meaning and passion and purpose and fulfillment. So I really work with them to connect with what's important to them and what they want to create in their lives. And it's just, it's some of the most fun and fulfilling work that I could ever think of doing.
But how'd you get started in this? Like, where'd you grow up and tell me about where you come from. What's the background story?
So the background is I grew up in Westchester County, New York, which is just about an hour north of Manhattan. I grew up in a really nice neighborhood. I had a loving mother and father. I had an older sister who introduced me to, rock and roll and Fruit Loops and let me do all sorts of, things that my parents wouldn't let me do. I was like, my dad was just he is just this wickedly intelligent guy, but also very fun. I had all the cool toys growing up. I had the go-kart. I had the remote control cars. I had all of the accoutrement. I was really quite fortunate. And, but I will say there is one thing, and I think this plays into how I ended up doing what I ended up doing. And what I do now is there was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure to perform. I was a bright kid. I was always in the top of the class, but I would bring home, let's say I bring home a test, it's got a 97 on it. And my father would look at it and he wouldn't say, good job. He would say, why'd you miss those? Why didn't you get 100? Where those 3 points go? And then he would look at it and he'd go, you know the answer to this. You know these. I know you know these. You made a careless, stupid mistake. And really what my 8-year-old brain heard was, you're stupid. My father never said that, but that's how I heard it. And then it became this, in a sense, trajectory. And I know we're going to get to it, but it's created this foundation and this trajectory, which ended up, leading me to what I ended up doing. And so I'll fast forward just a little bit. I ended up being a personal trainer. I was a personal trainer because I was a competitive power lifter. I was actually a competitive bench press champion. And everybody was like, you need to train. And I finally got into it. And I really loved the work. I loved doing what I was doing. And one of my clients became very friendly with her and her husband. And we're out for drinks one night. And her husband says, how much money do you make? And I told him. And he goes, wow, it's more than I thought. That's really good. How would you like to make 4 times that? And I said, I'm listening. He goes, go meet with a friend of mine. That's all he said. He didn't give me any information, didn't tell me anything else. And so I schedule an appointment with this guy, with the friend. Turns out he's the president of this technology company. And I walk in there. I have no idea what they do. I can barely turn on my own laptop. I not computer literate whatsoever. And I sit down in front of him and the guy looks at me. He looks like Johnny Cash. He's just wearing all black. He's like 6'2", an intimidating looking guy sitting across from, this big giant oak table. And he says, so Sandy sent you my way. Who are you? What do you do? And I looked at him. I go, Rick? I said, I don't know what you guys do here. I said, there's 2 things you need to know about me, though. I said, number 1, I'm extremely intelligent. Number 2, I'll work my fucking ass off for you. And he just looks at me and he goes, you're hired. And that is how I started my corporate career. I actually left personal training, took a massive pay cut to start at the bottom of this company that was a partner of Cisco Systems. So we were selling all the routers and the switches, security software, all the services that go behind that into a variety of companies. And that's how I started my 13-year career in the corporate world. I hope that gives you a little bit of background to go with.
Yeah. And I was kind of curious as you're talking about your father for a minute. Now, what did he do?
He is a patent attorney for IBM. He worked with them for 48 years.
So he kept the bar pretty high. The standards were high for him. He's, lawyer, attorney, and, now, and I can relate to that, and I think that's the part, especially as parents, we've got to remember is that our words, like the engagement we have with our kids, like they're formidable, and it's how are you leading them and with what type of tools, which stick are you using, because it's I can relate to that. I think it's something that I have to remind myself. I like to know that everything I say, these kids are soaking it up, and you got to be real careful with what you're doing.
Yeah. And I know it wasn't his intention to send that message by no stretch. And I imagine that's how he was raised. And like you said, a pretty high bar. My father's, got a wickedly interesting story. Didn't come from much and ended up, getting his doctorate in mechanical engineering and his law degree and becoming, one of, very like a handful of patent attorneys for IBM. I mean, really at the top of his game. So yeah, there was a high bar to meet.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think that's good, and then when it's wielded well, and now you're in your career. So how did that 13, 14 years go for you, once you got to, selling IT gear?
So the first couple of years were a complete learning curve. Like I said, I barely knew how to turn on a computer. And I was so fortunate when I got hired. Somebody else with the same role as myself was also hired maybe 2 days later. And we were going to be supporting these two account managers. And we were going to basically get, assigned to one of them. I got assigned to the best guy. I got assigned to the number one guy, the number one sales guy in the company, who was so gregarious with, everything that he taught me. He was generous with his finances. I mean, just really helped mold me into the salesperson I ended up becoming. So the first 3-4 years was just that learning curve. And this actually is very important. Because I started at the bottom, I learned how every single thing in that company and our partner company, I learned how every single thing worked. I knew how every single component worked down to the smallest detail. And when this account manager decided to move on to a different opportunity, there was only one person who was ready to take over all of those big accounts. And so I was promoted and given all of the accounts in one day. And that's actually when the money really started flowing. That was when the, broke right through the 6-figure mark. And then, the 150, the 200, the 250, and it just kept going up, up and up. And I was very fortunate about all of that. I mean, that was really, it was amazing how it worked out.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And what's the time frame that all this is going on, in the 2000s?
It was early 2000s into around 2013. Around 2013. And that's 2013 is when it all came to a screeching halt.
Well, and before we get it even to that aspect of it, what did outside of work life look like for you?
This is a great question because it really frames what I just hinted at. I spent pretty much every cent that I made. I had the nice cars. I wore Panerai watches. I went to the finest restaurants in Greenwich, Connecticut and Manhattan. I had VIP status at some of these restaurants. My wife and I would go up and down Greenwich Avenue, which is a little bit like Rodeo Drive on the East Coast, and just, buy the Christian Louis Vuittons, the Jimmy Choos, all the big names. And it was just living a lifestyle of absolute excess and chasing high after high, going after the next thing, the next, swipe of the platinum card, and just really caught up in the lifestyle. I mean, just out there enjoying, so much so to the point that I actually started shirking my work responsibilities because I was having so much fun. I worked out of the house. I had the freedom as a salesperson. I would do my sales calls, but I also would work out of the house. So I had the freedom inherent with that. I would find myself getting drunk and having, lunch in the middle of the day, having 4 or 5 hour lunches with my wife in the middle of the day when I should be working, and just, drinking copious amounts of very expensive wine, and then going shopping or going to get massages. I mean, just really living what I think a lot of people would say was the life, but in reality, it wasn't.
Now, with regard to the was that kind of known, or was this the beginnings of kind of like seeing what you could get away with? Like, was it known, or was it that type of culture where your bosses or the owner of the company or whoever was like, hey man, you're killing it. Just keep killing it. I don't care what you do, keep killing it. Or were you starting to kind of, like I say, see what you can get away with?
That's interesting because it was a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. I went through a lot of managers and a lot of directors, and a lot of them were actually very encouraging to the point of, I remember one time I was out mowing my lawn and the guy called me and he said, "Are you at your computer?" I said, "I got to be honest, I'm out mowing the lawn." And he says, "Craig, I got to tell you how happy that makes me. That's why we're in sales. That's why we do what we do. So you can do all of these things and have fun." So he was very encouraging of that. Other managers, not so much, but I was starting to test those waters. I definitely was starting to test those waters to see what I could get away with, and thinking that, I'd always, I didn't honestly work that hard in school, and I still did fairly well. And I thought I could do the same thing in this corporate atmosphere.
Right. Yeah. And like, how long were you married at this point?
We were married, let's see, just a few years. It was 3 years or so.
So what was the big driver? Tell me where things went from there. So you're killing it. You're having the life, as you put it, buying everything, get your hands on at every shiny object that floated across your path. It sounds like what happened?
This was the confluence of many different events. The products that I was selling were becoming more commoditized. So it was much more competitive and the margins were shrinking. So my paychecks were shrinking. Like I said, I was shirking my responsibilities. That started impacting my paychecks. And people would ask me all the time, "Do you like your job?" And I gave the same canned answer to everyone. I don't like my job at all. I like what my job affords me. And I loved that lifestyle. And now my lifestyle, my identity, I'd become those things. I became my BMWs, my fancy watches, my fancy dinners. That was who I was. That's how I thought I had to show up in the world. That's really, I can't express how much I thought that's who I was. So now I've got these shrinking paychecks is threatening the lifestyle, but it's threatening who I am as a human, as a man. It's threatening all of that. And I also, behind the scenes of that, when I say that I didn't like my job, but I liked what it afforded me, there was actually an underneath meaning to that only I knew. I always wanted to create my own business. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to write a screenplay. I had a million ideas, but I could never get them on paper. I wanted to do something really creative, but I didn't have the courage to go for it, to actually do it. I thought I had to leave it all behind to create something new. And so shrinking paychecks, a desire to create something. And like I said, I started at the bottom of the company, so I knew how everything worked. I started looking at our partner company's warranty policy. And I realized there was an opportunity for me to exploit it for my financial gain. And by doing that, I could not only fix my shrinking paycheck problem, my identity problem, I could, in a sense, solve that entrepreneurial problem. I could create this thing that would fill that void of trying to to be creative and to create something on my own. So it really just came about where all of these things came together and resulted in me committing fraud against one of the largest technology companies in the world.
And what did you get tipped off? Like, how did you come into this, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure you didn't, or maybe did. Like, how did you come into figuring out what to do? Like, to exploit the warranty process.
I looked like John Nash in A Beautiful Mind, if you've ever seen that, where he had just notes and Post-its and things written all over the place and journals filled with things. It took, I can't remember exactly how long, but I'd say it took several months for me to put together the fraud that I committed. There were a lot of moving pieces, and I'll never forget the day that I actually came to it, where I just looked at all the work I had done and I said, this is going to work. This has legs. I can do this thing. And it just really, it just was like a light switch. I found the key to the treasure I was seeking, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is actually going to work.
But did you know, like, so you're going through, and now were you going through going, okay, this is how can I make more money? That my income's dwindling. I need to be back at this bar, so to speak. Did you know you were doing wrong, or were you just figuring, how am I going to solve for this? And you were solving for it. Did you know it was wrong out of the gate, or did it just your entrepreneurial mind kind of take over to just solve for it, to hell with like what's right or wrong? What was it? Did you kind of not know you were doing wrong, or did you know you were doing wrong?
I love this question. And I think there's really only one way to answer it. When everything came together, it was a fraud. So it was all done through my laptop, right? When everything came together and I decided to initiate the fraud, it required hitting the send button. It required hitting the enter button. And right when I was about to hit send to kick this thing off, my heart spoke and it said, stop, don't do this. This is not the way. And I ignored that voice. I ignored it. And my fraud went on for just about 10 months. And every single time I hit that send button, every single time I hit the mouse button, every single time I did something, that voice said, stop, don't do this. This is not the way. And I just ignored it over and over again. There is something called the fraud triangle. And it basically is need, opportunity, and rationalization. So my need was my shrinking paychecks and the perceived attack on my identity. The opportunity was the warranty policy. And the rationalization came even through the voice saying that of the way I committed my fraud. They would send me something, the technology company would send me something, and I would return something back to them. So I rationalized that it was a one-for-one swap, even though I was lying about why I was receiving that new piece, creating false identities to create that new piece, setting up UPS boxes at various stores to commit the fraud. I mean, so many of those things, but I just fell back on that rationalization of, no, this is an even swap. It's okay.
Yeah. So now I got you. So that you were, so this was full bore. Yeah. So you're creating, like I said, false identities. You're manipulating the system to make this happen.
I absolutely was. And it started with, just one piece of equipment. And then I realized that this could work and it could scale. So then I started, went to 2 pieces of equipment, 3 pieces of equipment, 4 pieces of equipment, and just started growing it to this crazy level. And there were so many balls being juggled. There was so many things up in the air, and it was exhausting. Yeah.
I mean, even as I was hearing you first explain it, like I'm creating identities, sounds like placing orders, going to, fake made up PO box, not made up PO boxes, but UPS store, man. Yeah, that's deep. That's sophisticated. But who else? Like, did anyone know you were doing this?
Nobody. My wife knew I was doing, now ex-wife, she knew I was doing something, but I did not provide details. I didn't go into the exact routine and process that I was following. Just gave her just tiny little tidbits, and nobody knew what I was doing. And to your point, I want to say when I was arrested, the FBI agent asked, and I think they do this with everybody, but they want to make sure there's no co-conspirators. And they said, who else was involved? And I said, no one. And they said, who else was involved? There's no way that one human being could perpetuate what you perpetuated. There's a team of people behind this. And they were like, we have to think that there's about 30 people behind this. I had to convince them it was just me.
Yeah. And that again speaks to the sophistication, because it sounds like you really architected something that was deep, So yeah, it sounds like you were juggling and but you built a system basically. Like that's why I use that entrepreneurial, and I think you said it first, but I wanted to echo it back, because it was this entrepreneurial mind of yours, and your intelligence kind of took over and built a system, to print money, so to speak.
I love the way that you just said that. That's exactly what it was. It was creating a system, which is really interesting because after I was arrested, after the FBI was going through all my files, the agent that said we think there might be like 30 people behind this came up to me later and actually said, he goes, I want to thank you for the meticulous records you keep. You made my job so easy. Because never before have I seen somebody keep such meticulous records.
Right. Yeah. I mean, funny, not funny, right? Like,
which is an interesting compliment to get.
Right. Yeah. No, 100%. So you get this. So what happened? Like the day it hit the fan, like what went down? What was that day? What happened? What transpired? What was going through your head?
It was October 1st, 2013. And I had started at a new company. One of our biggest competitors wooed me away with a really aggressive pay package. So I'm 2 weeks into a new job and I'm no longer working out of the house. So I drive from our home in Connecticut to my office in Manhattan. And I take the elevator up about 36 floors. I'm setting up my desk for the day. Taking out my laptop, taking out my phone, putting out my journal, my pen. And when I put my phone down, I notice that it says 1 missed call and voicemail. And I'm so confused because I had the phone on me the whole time. So I put it up to my ear and I hear the following. Mr. Stanland, this is Special Agent McTiernan with the FBI. We are at your residence and have a warrant for your arrest. You need to call us and come home immediately, or we will issue a warrant with the federal marshals. And it's hard to describe what happened in that moment. It was as though the oxygen was sucked out of the room, while simultaneously my heart fell the 36 floors I had just come up. Sheer terror, sheer panic, and that voice that told me not to do it chimed in at that moment and said, I told you so. And it was a brutal, horrible day. I had to drive. I had to come up with an excuse. Why am I leaving? I'm the new guy. I don't even know everybody's name yet. I have to leave the office that I literally just walked in. I feel like there's a neon sign pointing FBI Most Wanted, just following me everywhere. I feel like everybody in the office heard that voicemail, like it was broadcast over the PA system. And I go and I get my car and I take about an hour drive up to Connecticut, calling my wife to see what's happening. And she just answers the phone after 7 excruciatingly long rings and just says, Craig, what's happening? And I couldn't even answer her. I'm trying to get details. I'm calling my father to let him know the FBI is at my house. I don't have a defense attorney because I hadn't planned for any of this. And so I called my real estate attorney, who actually had a white collar defense attorney who worked out of their office. So I was able to secure representation. And when I get home, I enter the gates of our community and I take the right-hand turn down the hill, and it just comes into view. There are probably about 15 vehicles parked there, cop cars, undercover cars. They look like something that was like a SWAT truck, and just agents wearing those blue jackets with the yellow letters, just all standing around. And they saw my car, they knew what I drove, and they all just pointed and they guided me into this parking spot and controlled my movements as I opened up the door and I got out of the car. And they just asked me to identify myself. They turned me around, they frisked me, they turned me back around and said, "You are under arrest." And it was just one of the most horrifying and surreal days of my life.
I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, just the pit of, I don't know, the emotional pit. Because I imagine there's got to be so much there: the regret, the remorse, the fear, the uncertainty. I mean, were your neighbors out there, watching the whole scene as well and all that kind of jazz?
When the agent turned me around to put handcuffs on me, and I asked him, I was like, "Please don't put handcuffs on me." I said, "Look at me. I'm not a threat. I'm not a large guy. I'm 5'4", 130 pounds. And he said, "It's procedure." And right when he started putting them around, I looked up to see my neighbor, Carl, peeking through his curtains. And when we made eye contact, Carl was probably in his 60s, but he acted like a 6-year-old who was caught and jumped out of view and closed the curtain quickly. And it's just one of those surreal moments that added to the weight of what was happening. Fortunately, I think he was the only person who saw, but I lived in a pretty tight community, and with the amount of vehicles that were there and the amount of people, I'm sure more people were well aware of what was happening than just that one individual.
Yeah. And I mean, and the reason that even came to mind, right? Because you'd say like, well, what do you worry about the neighbors looking? What made that come to mind was that you had spent your career at this point, building this persona, this thing that you were chasing, these things, this lifestyle that you mentioned earlier. And a part of building that lifestyle, when you see it, is that prestige, that like what you're putting on for other people to see, right? It's about how people see you. So just like going from what you were living to this, just psychologically, is freaking turmoil to what you were trying to do. It's just compounds to the whole effect. Kind of what I'm kind of, as you walk me through it, I'm kind of imagining where you're at. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It was completely, here's this facade that I was fighting so hard to maintain that comes crumbling down in an instance. And to your point, after I was arrested, I couldn't look anybody in the eye anymore. I could not look people in the eye. If I looked them in the eye, I thought that they were looking through me. I felt like a ghost. I thought everybody knew, from the bank teller to the gas station attendant to whoever. I thought everybody knew that this scarlet letter that I felt inside was on the outside for everybody to see, that they could see my shame, that they could see my regret, they could see my guilt, and that they all thought I was just this disgusting, horrible human being. So I wouldn't look anybody in the eye. I would look at the tip of their left ear. I'm sure they knew what I was doing. We know when somebody's making eye contact with us, but this was my little trick, was the tip of the left ear or a spot on the wall directly behind them. Just so I didn't have to have that moment of being seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think that's the amount of shame to walk around with. That's a burden. That's a huge burden. So that day, and I think that, stay with the day for a moment. How helpless did you feel with going through that? Like, what were you feeling to, like, I don't know, like, were you feeling like you could do anything. I'd imagine you were just in a helpless situation that, I imagine they probably didn't want to let you speak. What was that aspect of it? The helplessness.
That's the perfect word. You nailed it. It's helplessness. It is sheer, utter helplessness that my life was no longer my own. It belonged to these people. It belonged to people that I hadn't even met yet. I knew that it was going to be the judge and the lawyers and, just this team of people behind the scenes that made all of this happen. And it was, not only was it the mental helplessness, having my arms behind my back handcuffed, it was physical helplessness. And it just exacerbated everything. And I was thrown into a river and I had zero control of where that river was going. That's what it felt like. It was just, and I was drowning along the way. But that helplessness is absolutely, that's the key word. Just powerless, helpless. And through all of that, terrified.
Right. Just sheer terror. So where did things go from there? And obviously you've got your wife, you've got your family, you've got your friends. Like, where did things go from here with what you were going through, and then how it was impacting those around you and those that you cared about?
So I think this is super interesting because it made me realize at the time that it was the equivalent of having a still pond and dropping a boulder in the middle of it. And those ripples going out and impacting so many areas of my life, my wife, my family, my friends, my new employer, just that ripple effect. And the day of the arrest, I knew that the boulder had dropped in, but I didn't realize how far those ripples were actually going to reach. So I wasn't able to speak to my wife when they didn't let me go in the house. They stopped me before I even got in the house, and they kept us away from each other. So I was not able to see her. I was not able to make any phone calls at the time. Put in the car, and I was brought to a courthouse where my arraignment took place. And it was then this was interesting. I was sitting in the juror's box in the courtroom when I heard the door open, and I looked and I saw my wife for the first time. And that was, in a sense, one of the first ripples that I became aware of from the boulder dropping in, because I could see the sheer terror and uncertainty in her eyes. I could see the weight on her shoulders when she walked into that courtroom, not knowing what the hell was happening, not knowing what the hell was going to happen. And I was fortunate. My father and my wife put up my bail, which was, I think, $100,000. They co-signed the $100,000 bail agreement. And so I was able to be released on my own recognizance. And from there, it was the long drive home from the courthouse with my wife, and just her, rightfully so, asking me a million questions. What the hell happened? What are we going to do? What now? And I had zero answers. And she, like I had said earlier, she knew I was doing something, but I never gave her details. But I would always say, when she would ask, is what you're doing okay? And I'd say, it's fine. It's fine. I would just get pissed off and I would blow it off. And she was just yelling, I thought you said it was okay. You lied to me. And the betrayal in her eyes. So we get home and it's just all of these questions. But now I haven't spoken to my father in ages. So I have to call him and I have to explain that I was arrested and charged with one count of mail fraud. And at the time in the arraignment, they said that it would be up to a $250,000 fine and up to 20 years in prison. So I had no idea how the court system works, but I heard 20 years and literally thought my life was over. And then I had to make all the phone calls, and those ripples just kept going out. I had to call my mom. I had to call my aunt. I had to call my father-in-law. I called my new employer, who refused to accept my resignation because I didn't tell him exactly what happened. I just said, thank you for the opportunity, but something has occurred and I need to resign. And he refused to accept it. And it was just moment after moment. And one way that I like to put it is the bottom fell out, and I was falling and I could not see a bottom anywhere. It was just falling into the abyss. It was falling into infinity. And just each of those little steps was just a further drop to that bottom. All the while, the shame was just increasing.
Who hung in there for you? Right. So it sounds like maybe your mother and father, you mentioned stepfather. So it sounds like maybe they were split. You mentioned your father, you hadn't talked to him ages. The employer, not accepting your resignation. Like who obviously on this initial kind of event fallout, you had some supporters come through. Who'd you keep? Who'd you lose?
The day of, everybody was a support structure. Everybody was a support structure. As the process started going deeper and deeper, that's when people started falling off. And I was fortunate that not a lot of people fell off. My employer, so when I was arrested, the government was actually in a shutdown. So the FBI was very gleeful in telling me that everybody who came to arrest me that day was doing it for no pay. So that's important to say, because everything was shut down. The FBI press office was also shut down. So there was no news. It didn't hit the news until 2 weeks later. And then it hit the news and it blew up. It blew up on Google. And that's when my employer found out what happened. And he couldn't have been more kind and more gentle and more professional and looking out for the company in the way that he accepted my resignation. I was really impressed by him. And my father-in-law was still supporting me at the time, but it was getting less and less. My wife was supportive, but also I could feel pulling back. I had this sense that we were over, that we were done. My friends were fantastic. It really wasn't until I ended up going to prison that I ended up losing a couple of friends over it. And now I realize what an amazing filter this was, if you really think about it, to be able to, filter these people out of my life. Is that if you really can't be here during this, then you're not really my friend. And then counter to that, a couple of people who were acquaintances stepped up and came to visit me in prison out of the blue. And I mean, just, it's interesting how people handle something of this magnitude. So I love that question. Thank you.
Yeah, no. And I think it's one of these things, right? In some reading and content, I've kind of dove into some of the psychology of this, because it's a betrayal, right? The common thing you see is like when, the spouse, cheats on their partner, right? And the psychological impact is the fact that you're not who they thought you were, and the betrayal of that. And so you can't, the abandonment that you feel would experience from people. It's like, they come to find out, in their mind, at least it would seem like you weren't who they thought you were, because they found out you were capable of this deception. Right. And so it's kind of like, it's almost like this, who are you? Like, I don't know who you are. Is that how you felt it? Like that those who you lost along the way, like, was it just a betrayal and just they didn't feel like who this event, because obviously you've grown, we'll get to that part of it too, but did it feel like people, just, you weren't who they thought you were? Was that a major part of it?
Definitely with my wife. Absolutely. You nailed it 100%. It was a betrayal. I broke the key foundational piece of any relationship, which is trust. I destroyed that. I completely destroyed that. So that was definitely with my wife. That was eventually, I believe, my father-in-law also fell into that. And then a few of the friends that I lost, I don't think that they left because of the betrayal. I honestly think they left because it was just too much work. It was just too much work for them to be in this relationship, to be friends. It was much easier things that they could do in their life. And I think that was the crux of why some of those friends left.
Yeah. And that was the other side of this, as I was hearing you explain the loss of your circle, or the pieces of it, was that the gratitude for those who hung in and came through, despite the error, for you, right? I was about to say for who you are, but I think we're going to talk about finding who you really are. But for you, despite this error, and judgment, we'll say, the gratitude for those people, that's got to be immense.
It's absolutely tremendous. And I would have found the entire process next to impossible without that support. So the gratitude for them was immeasurable. But here's an interesting component of that gratitude and how amazing everybody was. How my father, my mother, my aunt, my best friend, how these people stepped up was mind-blowing and so supportive. But here's the, if you will, mindfuck of the whole thing. Because of the shame that I was experiencing, I didn't feel worthy of all this kindness. So every single time somebody would extend an act of kindness, which I was grateful for, it stung like there was rubbing alcohol running through my veins. That's what it felt like. It was just because of the shame and the unworthiness. How could somebody be this nice to me when I'm such a piece of garbage because of what I did? So it was a weird double-edged sword.
Yeah. And I guess, did you feel transformation in I don't know. It sounds like that voice who told you not to was now back in the driver's seat and was looking down in judgment on yourself, on who you were to have done that. Like, were you really, was that kind of how it was?
I fell into absolute self-loathing. That voice, I would say the voice that told me not to do it, that was my heart. That was my higher self. My ego with the lower s, the lowercase s self, that took over and really just berated me into pure shame and self-loathing. How could I do what I did? How could I sacrifice so much for so little? I didn't know who I was because my identity had become so rooted in all of my things. And now all of the things are gone instantaneously. So I didn't know who I was other than the man who destroyed his life, the life of the woman he loves. And I was alone at rock bottom with that guy. And I absolutely hated him. I wanted out of my skin. I just wanted to rip my skin off and be done with it. And that voice, the higher self, my heart, because I ignored it so many times, it felt as though it disappeared. It felt as if it was completely gone. And I now know that voice is always with us. But because the other voice was so loud that I was such a piece of garbage, I couldn't hear it. And I have to tell you, the emptiness that ensues without that higher self voice just exacerbated the shame, just made it even worse. I felt so hollow and empty inside. I felt like I was walking on, twig legs, like bird bones in my body. It was just such a horrible vacuum of an existence.
Yeah. Because that betrayal we talked about, I guess you're really living that within yourself. You betrayed yourself, your potential. So that was the you versus you in your head. It seems like that you were loathing over. That you betrayed your potential. Your higher self, who you could have been. In a way.
Absolutely. And in the beginning, it wasn't even a battle. It was just a one-sided fight. It was just the pure self-loathing just driving me to the point of, I think this will summarize in a sense of how bad that voice got. I started meditating in prison. Always said I wanted to before I went to prison. But I started meditating. And one time during my meditation, this short film of what it would look like to blow my brains out popped into my brain. And, I blew it off. I thought that was really weird. But then the video played again. I blew it off again. I was like, no, obviously I don't want to think about that. And it played again and it played again. And next thing you know, it was on a perpetual loop every second of every day for 4 months straight. And it's maddening to live in that world because the video was so real and so graphic and raw that I could actually, towards the end of those 4 months, I could feel everything as if it was happening in real time. It was no longer happening in my brain. It actually had physical sensations with it. And it's how deep into my neural pathways this video had dug itself.
Yeah, this infection of the mind. So you're in the depths of hell. Where do we go from here?
In the depths of hell, I would, towards the end of that 4 months of that video playing on perpetual loop, I would go to sleep. We were counted in prison a couple times a day to make sure that nobody had escaped. And there was a 10 p.m. count. So I used to just wait for that 10 p.m. count because I would go to sleep after we were counted. And it was the worst and best part of my day because it was the worst because after I was counted, I would climb into my bunk and rest my head on the pillow. It was the culmination of that video and all of the self-loathing would just come in and I wasn't going to cry. I'm not going to cry in prison. I didn't want to be that guy. So I would hold back the tears and I would pray. And I'm not even necessarily a religious man, but I would pray and say, please make it stop. Please make it stop. Please make it fucking stop. And I would repeat that over and over again until sleep put me out of my misery. And that was actually the best part of my day because I would sleep and have an escape from that reprieve. And I say that because, you pray, please make it fucking stop over and over again. I started planning how I was going to kill myself. And I couldn't talk to anybody in prison about that because if you mention suicide in prison, they will lock you in solitary confinement. And I'm already in my own personal hell, and the idea of being locked in solitary scared the hell out of me. So I couldn't share it over the phone with any family because phone calls are recorded and listened to. Emails are recorded and read. And I couldn't speak to any of my friends inside prison who were some of the nicest, kindest people I've ever met. But out of fear that they'd be worried about me and they would talk to a guard or some other prison official. So I just bottled it up and I started planning how I could end my life. And then one day, it was a Wednesday, check my email. There's an email from my best friend of over 30 years, my friend Sean. And he just says one sentence, hey man, can I come for a visit this weekend? And the visiting room was not monitored. I could tell Sean everything that was going on. I could get this burden out of me. So I was thrilled. I was absolutely excited. I said, absolutely, you can come visit. Saturday seemed to take forever to arrive, but it finally did. And Sean buys some food out of the vending machine. We sit down and Dale, I can't tell you like the elation that I felt that I was going to be able to get this up and out of me and share it in a safe place with my friend Sean. It was so joyful and it felt so good. And I opened my mouth to speak. And before I can say a word, Sean's telling me about all of his problems. He's getting divorced. He's got, work issues. He's got money issues. He has a sadness in his voice and in his eyes that I've never seen in 30 plus years of friendship with this man. And it was at that moment that I realized that I had value and that I had worth, and that I had value and worth outside of the things that I had believed made me worthy. I was not my fancy cars. I was not my fancy watches. I was just a friend to my friend and nothing more. And that is actually the moment that my transformation began.
And how did it go from there? So now did you get the relief? Did you guys share where you were, or did you, just be there for him at that point?
I was just there for him because I had this. I don't even think he now knows the magnitude of his visit. But at the time, I don't think he could have seen what was happening inside of me. But when I realized that I had that value and that worth and that I didn't want to die, I just didn't want to feel like that anymore. When I realized all of these things, I didn't have to tell him anything. That was relief alone. I never ended up telling him until I shared the chapter in my book that goes into all the detail of this, just to make sure he was okay that it was going to be put out in the world the way that it was presented. That's the first time he found out about it. We talked about him. I held space for him. I listened to him. Then it got into the fun stuff that, two guys who've known each other for 30 plus years, what's Rob up to? What's Chris up to? What's Jay getting into? Talking about all the fun things. I'm telling him about the silly things that can only happen in prison. Like, it just totally transformed. And what I think is interesting is, I would go to sleep praying that it would stop. And when I woke up in the morning, this is before Sean's visit, when I woke up in the morning, every single morning, I was disappointed to see the light of a new day. And after Sean's visit, I didn't pray. And when I woke up the next morning, I wasn't all rainbows and sunshines and unicorn, but I wasn't disappointed at the light of a new day. And even that gave me hope to then rebuild and reinvent my life.
That's amazing. And I mean, I can't honor you enough for kind of sharing this. And that from there, how did you start building? Like, where did you take it from prison? When did you get out? What transpired? Now you're starting to turn the corner and start to climb. It sounds like. Where did you go from here?
There were a couple of really pivotal moments for me inside prison. Number one, and I think this is really important, is that I was sitting in the prison library and I was journaling. I'd started journaling. There were 3 practices I started in prison that I still do to this day, and I rarely miss a day. I mean, 7 years later, I've missed a handful of days for these 3 practices: meditation, gratitude, and journaling. So I was journaling in prison, and I was really doing a lot of woe is me. And I was wishing things were different. I was wishing that I was home with my wife and my dog and my cat, but she had already told me that she was leaving me. So that was, an impossibility. I wish I didn't make the choices I made. I wish I wasn't in prison. I wish I wasn't financially ruined. I wish I wasn't a convicted felon. And I was wishing, and my intuition took over. And I just started writing. I accept that I'm a federally convicted felon. I accept that I made the choices that I made. I accept that I'm financially ruined. Everything that I was wishing that it was different, I went through and I accepted it. And it hurt like hell to do that. I mean, it stung because I was admitting things that were really crappy. But when I was done, I'm sitting inside prison and I felt something amazing. I felt freedom because I was no longer trapped in the past, wishing for things to be different when they cannot be anything other than they are, which was impacting my ability to see my future. So practicing acceptance was my first step. I still didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I had a baseline. And then another pivotal moment inside prison was when this is going to sound weird for anybody who maybe doesn't know how our federal prison system works. I knew I had a 2-year sentence, but I didn't know when I was actually leaving, because you leave prison to go to a halfway house, to kind of like assimilate back into the real world. There's no set date when you leave prison to go to the halfway house. It's dependent on so many different factors. So it's up in the air, but I knew that my time was coming. I knew that it was coming, and eventually my name went on the board that I'd be leaving prison to go to the halfway house. And it was such a moment of great excitement. But this meant that I had to go back into the real world. I had no job. I was getting divorced. I was financially ruined. I didn't have I had family who were amazing, but I didn't have a home. I thought I was going to be homeless. All of the pressures of the real world were coming in, and I was scared. And my mentor, Ed, saw my name on the board, and he approached me, and we start walking down the hallway, and he says, Craig, how you feeling? You're going to get out of here. How great is that? And I told him, I said, Ed, getting divorced, no money, no home, no job. Who's going to hire a felon? I'm really, I'm scared. And he put his arm around me, which was really nice because there's not a lot of touch in prison, something that I learned very much to miss. And Ed was probably 20 years older than me. So it was a little bit of a fatherly feel to it. And he put his arm around my shoulder. He looked me in the eye and he said, Craig, you have a blank canvas. You can paint whatever picture you want. And he reframed my entire life in that moment. So those were two very pivotal moments for me to transform. And that just led me into a massive amount of introspection. And a lot of that introspection was done in the production of my book. And just really getting to the most raw and real version of the story so that I could not only help myself, but I could help somebody else. And that was a several-year journey just within. And in the interim, I was, after I got out of prison, went to the halfway house, I was working at the front desk at a gym, making $12 an hour. I used to make more in a month than I was going to make in an entire year. But I had a job, and it allowed me to, because it wasn't mentally taxing. It didn't eat up a lot of mental bandwidth. I was able to focus for about 3.5 years just on me. And just really getting to the crux of why I made that choice, what was missing. And really from there, that was really building my foundation in which the rest of my life is and was built on.
Yeah. And you use the word acceptance a lot. And I was curious if you have a reason or your thoughts around acceptance versus forgiveness. You didn't use forgiveness as a word, like forgave yourself. You said you kind of accepted what you'd done. What are your thoughts on that?
This is also very interesting because acceptance was that first step. It was the giving myself a baseline. Forgiveness came a few steps later because of that shame, because of that guilt. I knew I had to forgive myself. Otherwise, I would be held in the grips of regret and shame for the rest of my life. And the forgiveness journey was extremely long, extremely difficult. Daunting, like you can't believe, because I didn't feel worthy of forgiveness. I had to do a lot of other work to be able to get to the point where I genuinely forgave myself. I know that, and I do believe in the power of what I'm about to say, but a forgiveness practice of saying, I forgive myself for committing a crime and repeating that over and over again. I do believe in the power of that. But because I had ignored my voice and the voice felt like it went away, when I started saying, I forgive myself, I didn't trust myself because I couldn't trust my own words. So I had to rebuild trust. I had to rebuild my self-worth. I had to rebuild my sense of enough before I even got to that place to be able to forgive myself. And when I said those words, to know that I was worthy of them and to trust what I was saying.
And this was still, right? So, because I'm trying to keep track of the timeline of this. So now before you went to the halfway house, you had accepted it, but it took much longer to get to this point of forgiveness. Is that correct?
That is correct. It took a few years to actually get to the point of forgiveness. Yeah, it took a few years. That's how strong the shame and the feeling of not being worthy. The forgiveness is one of the greatest acts of love and compassion that we can extend to ourselves. And I really believed, and I know this isn't true now, but at the time, because of the betrayal that I had done to my wife, I destroyed love, and therefore I'm not worthy of love. And that means from other people and myself. And how could I give myself this gift of love through forgiveness when I destroyed love. There was a lot of work through that as well to be able to get to that. I mean, honestly, from the time I left prison to the time I could actually forgive myself, it was probably about 3 to 4 years.
So what do you do now? What's how has your life changed, from that point of reaching forgiveness to where you are today?
It has completely, as one can imagine, has completely and utterly transformed my life into a life that I wouldn't exchange for anything at all. I mean, genuine joy and fulfillment every single day. So I am a best-selling author. I'm a TEDx and keynote speaker. I've got a couple of keynotes coming up, actually for the American Certified Fraud Examiners, of all things. I'm doing a couple of keynotes for them this fall and winter, right? Which I'm super excited about those. And I coach people. I call myself a reinvention architect because when I first realized that I wanted to really give meaning to all of the suffering I caused to my family, to my friends, to my wife, and to myself, I thought, how could I best do this? And remember I had said that I wanted to write a screenplay? Well, writing the book, I was actually connecting with that old desire. And I knew that the book would be of service to other people. I know that speaking openly the way that I do about the story and the experience can be of service to other people. And that's what led me into wanting to coach, was taking the suffering and giving it meaning in service of others. And so what I do now is I really want to connect with people, what I would call pre-choice Craig, the Craig that was living that crazy life, and wanted to create something new for himself, but didn't know how to and was too afraid to do that. So I specialize in working with high achievers who have summited their professional mountain, to find themselves empty. And I love using the word, the phrase a success-sized hole in their lives, because that's exactly how I felt. And, I really help them navigate and break free of, their golden handcuffs, the life on autopilot, just doing the same thing over and over again. And we hit the reset button so that they can fill that success-sized hole. But this is the most critical component, without giving up everything that they fought so hard to build. Because that's such a common misconception that if I am to reinvent myself, if I'm going to reset my life, that I have to give up everything that I fought so hard to build. And that is completely false. It's a belief that I fell into that was a contributing factor to my choice to commit that fraud.
Yeah, no, it's the fear of loss that we face, right? We don't know it to be true, but it's the fear that we have that we're going to lose something of value by making a change or making a decision, and it's something that takes the courage to face and overcome. Who is your clients today? Who are you serving? When do your clients come to you? What are they up against? How are you helping them?
They are majority. Well, it's interesting. I have a bunch in the corporate world. I've got a musician, I've got photographers, people through a lot of different things, but really they're folks that they climbed the mountain they were told they should. And now they want to climb the mountain that they really want to climb. And so they come to me when they realize that they've reached this inflection point where success and the things and the status just aren't cutting it. And they really want to, most of my clients are kind of at about the midlife point or so. And for the second half of their lives, so the second act of their lives, they really want to connect with leaving a legacy. They want to create something of meaning. They want to have that sense of fulfillment and joy. And they don't want to wait until retirement where, when I retire, I can do X, Y, and Z. They want to have that joy and fulfillment now. And that's when they come to me. And we just get, and I know this is one of your favorite words, and I love you for it, clarity. Just getting that clarity. It's like, what do you want to build in your life? How do you want to feel every day?
No, and I appreciate it. And that's like amongst my clients as well. Like, when I kind of query them and their favorite part of the experience, they always come back to clarity. It's like, it's shining the light on your future, and maybe shining the light on, I'll say, this darkness that you put yourself in by, the shadows of I think what you said as far as like what they were told to be and go obtain, like this mountain that you went and captured it, because that's what society or ego or egos of those around you told you or showed you that you were to get. And not knowing any better, you went and got it, and now you're like, well, why do I feel this way? And it's like this, and I appreciate you used the word, because it's something that, I think people dance around, but it's joy, like finding joy again, because you've got this rat race of a life and this pile of things. But if you don't have the joy, it's a lot of nothing. It's a lot of nothing piled up around you. It really is.
It really is. And I think what's so to your point, it can feel a little bit like a betrayal. Society and family and friends all telling us that we've got to climb this particular mountain. And, when you get to the top, there's going to be the reward is waiting for you. And then it's not up there. And it just feels like a bit of a betrayal. It's like, no, I did all the things I was supposed to do. Why don't I feel joy? And it really comes down to joy comes from within. It comes from doing things that are in alignment with who we want to be and how we want to show up. And just really connecting with that and taking action towards those things every single day. And when we create that joy, it actually, let's say we don't like our jobs, but if we have something that creates joy in our lives, all of a sudden our jobs are painted in a different color. It just, using that ripple analogy again, when we create joy in our lives, it ripples out to all other aspects of our lives and makes the things that aren't maybe that tolerable, it makes them that much more tolerable. And for the things that are awesome, it makes them even more so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's where, the clarity, when you establish clarity, right? When you sit down and go, who am I? And what do I really want? Like, because there's this bit of, back to kind of living that life that you talked about earlier, there's that score, people are keeping score. You're keeping score in this ego race, man. And it's wild to watch. But if you kind of get this clarity of what do you really want, not what you think you want because you think you should have it because that's what these other folks around you or whatever the case may be in the circle or your influence are after. So you're chasing it too. You're not being a leader, you're going with the flow, but you start to realize what you're congruent with and what you're not congruent with. And from there, it's another key thing I think that you mentioned earlier, I think is important is once you establish that clarity, right? You're kind of hitting this rat race and you're kind of going, man, why do I not feel the joy? Why do I have all this, but I don't feel good about it? And you truly have the courage to start getting that clarity, to find that courage or find that congruence. I realize that you're not living congruently with who you are. Now, the second round is, do you have the courage to do something about it, right? Do you have the courage to start living with who you want to be and how you want to feel? Or are you still going to continue to succumb to that score that you're trying to keep with ego of yourself and others? Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And both of those things, the clarity and the decision to do something about it, takes a massive amount of courage to get very clear on what you want. Because that is, I don't know if you find this with your clients, but I know that it can be a real sticking point to say to somebody, what do you want in your life? What really matters to you? And to go beyond the canned answers that we think that we're supposed to say, the BMW, the house on the beach, the vacation to Aruba, whatever it may be, like the canned answers, to really get to the point of somebody saying, I have a client who loves Japanese woodworking, but to be able to get very clear on that and to have the courage to say, this is what I want to do. That's, like you said, shining a light on it when you get really clear, because it's such a weighty question. What do you want in your life? To not be able to answer that. We don't like uncertainty. We don't like being afraid. And that question can inspire a lot of those feelings. So it takes a level of courage and deftness to be able to maneuver that to get to that clarity. And then, like you said, to be able to then take action on it. That is a huge thing, to let go of that comparison. Mark Twain, comparison is the death of joy. It really is, to put the scorecard away and to create a new scorecard. And maybe you're the only one on it, and that's what matters. But that takes a lot of courage and takes a lot of maneuvering to get to that point.
Yeah. And I think, and this is not a political show, and I know you don't want to talk about politics, but I'm going to speak on something that I just observe about our society today, because I love that quote. And actually, I hadn't heard that before. But in my opinion, social media has brought that upon us, right? Like, we are constantly comparing ourselves to those highlight reels online now. Like, it's in wondering, well, what's wrong with me? Why don't I have that? Why does everyone else not have problems that I have? And it's nonsense, and so comparison steals the joy 100%. I think a lot of people are starving for joy for all the wrong reasons. And they're in this trap where they're seeing this, and it's just this perpetual loop, downward spiral of what's wrong with me when everyone else has got it so well. Because they're comparing themselves to some fiction in a way, or at least not authenticity. Like, half truths is probably a better way to put it, right? Yeah, some of those things, those highlights we're seeing online are true, but they're only half the story. And the other half the story you're not seeing is that same struggle that you're feeling, within, because we all have them, right? Life is a struggle, man. Everyone's looking like, when I get here, it's going to be easy. Nope, it's never going to be easy, man. So let's get your head right. Life's a struggle. But you find, I appreciate you saying it, like the fulfillment in, the way you rise to that struggle and overcome it and keep climbing,
And I think there's a couple things I'd love to touch on there. Is with social media, what we end up doing is comparing our insides to somebody else's outsides. We have, like you said, no idea what the other half of the story is. No idea. The beautiful stage shot that we see behind the camera could be an absolute disaster. It could be a closet-sized apartment in New York City, but this person made one corner of it look fantastic and almost give it the scale, like it looks like it's a giant palatial place, but it is a 400 square foot closet in New York City that is, maybe has a cockroach in the corner. We don't see those things. We don't know the inner turmoil that somebody may be feeling to keep the pressure of this facade up. We don't know. And, a line that I wrote in my book was, society thought Robin Williams was happy. And, we just don't know somebody's internal struggles. We really don't. And I think that's so critical to remember, is to just, what feels good for us, and to really take action on that and letting go of that. I love the word scorecard, because that's it, letting go of that scorecard, because it's so arbitrary.
Yeah, like, get a real one. Get a real one on the things that matter to you, right? Not what matters to others, or what's going to keep those friends that aren't really your friends, that they're just the ones that you want to, compare that ego-driven scorecard with, And I think, like, knowing, like, that truth that, as you spoke it, that everyone's struggling and dealing with their stuff, and there's stuff going on behind the scenes. Like, yes, like, know that and give yourself some grace. and know that in how you interact with others, and bring some clarity to who you are and who you want to be. And then also bring some clarity to how you want to interact with others with that known, with that in mind, knowing that, the people that you're engaging with have the same struggles, dealing with the same stuff, probably heavier. And even if you act as if that's true, how much more joy we can bring to the world, just for ourselves and with others. I mean, just think like back to your story with, I believe you said his name was Sean, how it felt to be there for him, and feel that value. Like that's a value that we can all bring, that we're rising to, and navigate these struggles and challenges that we're up against, but also big and brave enough to support others in that same battle and not just go through that selfishly. So I think it's really, you got a great, powerful mindset around this, man. I love it.
Oh, thank you so much. And so do you. I love everything that you are putting out there. It's just resonates within me. I mean, the way that you're articulating everything it's beautiful. So thank you for that. And I think something that is important to remember is oftentimes the things that can bring us the greatest amount of joy don't cost anything, is to actually stop and be there for a friend. We can say that there's an opportunity cost because there's time spent. But, if we start analyzing that, then that's a whole different set of issues. But to be there for a friend, to just listen to them, taking the time to stop and look at a sunset or a sunrise and just be in awe of nature, going on hikes, going to the beach, all these little things. If, you've got the ability to do them, it doesn't actually cost a tremendous amount of money to do some of the things that bring us the greatest amount of joy. I love writing. I can do it with a pen and paper or my computer. Doesn't matter. But with a pen and paper, I mean, that's what, $3? And I can sit and create so much internal joy for myself. And it's not the Lamborghinis. It's not the Rolexes. It's not all of these things. And I have nothing against those things as long as they're not used as a way to define our identity and to support and bolster our ego.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
Right. Now, and Craig, this has been awesome. How can people find you online, find the book? Who's the audience for the book, and how can people connect with you?
So my website's craigstanland.com. I'm on LinkedIn under Craig Stanland, Instagram, Craig_Stanland. And my book is titled Blank Canvas, How I Reinvented My Life After Prison. And it is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, published by Lioncrest Publishing. And really, this book is, if I was to sum it up in, let's say, one sentence, it is a guide for anyone who wants to hit the reset button on their life without going to prison.
It's always a good idea. Stay out of prison.
Yes, it's always a good idea. I highly encourage that. But it is written in memoir format. It's my bullet train to rock bottom and the slow journey out, and all the tools and the techniques that I used to get me to where I am today.
I love it, man. I love it. No, I think I love your story, man. I think you're a great example that, what you think is the end is not the end. If you're still breathing, you're still in a fight. And I really, again, I just honor how you've come through that, right? I mean, it just took so much courage and, so much work and, just self-discovery and walking through the acceptance portion and the forgiveness and sharing, where you were mentally. And I know people get there and to know that, that's, I'll say, perfectly human. And it's not over yet. You can go back and, like you said, with your blank canvas and go where you want to go. I mean, I think it's a beautiful thing, man. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Dale, thank you so much for having me on. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge you for having this platform for people to come on and to share their stories and to add value as to the collective to what you said earlier, to hopefully increase the amount of joy in the world. Because when we have people coming on and sharing their experiences and what works for them, it really does allow people to connect with, how they want to show up, what they want to do. And the more people we have doing that, the more joy there is in the world. And it just has an impact all around. So thank you for that. And then again, thank you for having me on.
Oh man, it's an honor. So guys, find Craig online. We'll get it in the show notes. Go check him out. And Craig, we're going to talk again real soon.
Cool. I look forward to it. Thank you, Dale.